All right. So hello, everyone who's here right now. This is the annual Resilience, Flooding, and FEMA Community Rating System informational webinar. Just so everyone's aware, this is going to be recorded and it will be posted on the City Plan Flood Information page in the near future, within the next week or so. And before we get started, I'm just going to read this land acknowledgement statement that we like to start all of our presentations with. The land of our state is the territory of the Sequin, including Quinnipiac and Tungus, Mattabesic, Mohegan, Mashantucket, Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill, Paugussett, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples. These peoples have stewarded this land through many generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So getting into the agenda, we'll start with introductions. I am Kaylee Moran. I'm a planner at the New Haven City Plan Department, and I manage the city's participation in FEMA's community rating system, which we will discuss later on in the presentation. And David and Diane, if you guys want to introduce yourselves now, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. David Murphy from the company Resilient Land and Water. We're on-call consultants for the city, helping them with FEMA CRS and flood type information.
My name's Diane Ivkovic. I work at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I've worked with Kaylee and Dave for many, many years, and I am the state's National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator.
Thank you guys. And you guys and everyone will be hearing more from them throughout the presentation. But we're going to start off with a brief introduction to City Plan. We're going to go into New Haven's flood risks and actions to prevent flood loss during these events. We're going to go into some flood resources, and then we're going to go over both flood insurance and the FEMA Community Rating System program, which the City of New Haven participates in. So just a very broad introduction. What is planning? The goal of planning is to improve the health, safety, and economic well-being of all residents in our communities. The practice of planning involves thinking about how we move around the community, how to retain and attract thriving businesses, where we want to live, and where we would like to have opportunities for recreation. And planners typically take a systems view of the community, so looking at everything that makes the community what it is, buildings, roads, green spaces, and what we can do to make each of those things better and make them all fit together appropriately. So the New Haven City Plan Department we have a few main roles in the city. One is to serve as a regulatory body for land use development. If you've ever had to go in front of one of our 3 land use commissions, you'll know something about that. We also have long-term planning functions. I'll talk in a little bit about our Vision 2034 plan, which is our comprehensive plan. We coordinate with other departments and state agencies to plan, secure funding, manage large infrastructure projects, and we also provide a first point of contact for residents, property owners, developers, entrepreneurs, business owners, anyone who wants to do something that may require a regulatory process in the community. So, as I mentioned, Vision 2034 is New Haven's comprehensive plan. We are currently in the final stages of adopting the plan that we've been forming over the last couple of years. There was a lot of community engagement involved that some of you here might have been a part of at one point or another. And this plan is basically a vision document that guides the city in making policy decisions. Our boards and commissions will reference it when considering applications, and a larger purpose of this is to anticipate future conditions in the city based on the trends that we've seen over the last couple of decades. This is a requirement of the Connecticut General Statutes. So our previous plan ended this year. It was based on 2025. And if anyone is interested in seeing the draft plan, which is currently in the process of going through our Board of Alders, I have the link right there. And you can review that and get some more insight onto the process that was taken to create this plan. And this is just another one of a little more detail on one of our main functions, which is land use regulation. Over on the left here, we have our boards and commissions listed. We have some of our main functions, the environmental reviews, inland wetlands, coastal area management. And on the right, we have some examples of what we as a department have done to align our practice with our previous comprehensive plan and will continue to do with our new comprehensive plan. And now I'll turn it over to David to talk about flooding.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to say just real quickly before we move too far from Vision 2034, the city's comp plan, I had the pleasure of helping out with it, and it includes a lot of information about flooding. So that'll better serve the community in the next 10 years if they want to find information about flooding in the city. But for tonight, we're going to turn to the topic directly. And what I want to acknowledge right now is that the city has experienced many types of flooding over the years. And I think it's important to annually conduct this webinar and remind folks that flooding occurs. We should not be surprised by it. We should sort of expect that it's going to happen. And we want to make sure that we know what to do to protect ourselves and our vehicles and our properties from flooding and ensure that we're not harmed by flooding. And one other thing is to acknowledge, and we will do that tonight, the city's participation in the Community Rating System program, CRS, there on the bottom left, which is voluntary, but the city does it, participates and annually conducts information like this webinar to make sure people know about flooding. Next slide. So in the city, there are several types of flooding that occur, and we're going to go through them briefly and then look at some maps. So we have flooding that occurs along rivers and streams. We call that riverine flooding. We have coastal flooding that occurs, for example, during hurricane or winter storm, nor'easter storm surges. Sometimes we have flooding related to poor drainage, and a lot of times it's either drainage that's overwhelmed or drainage that is just designed for some other kind of storm so that it can't handle rains that we're getting these days. We can see combinations of river and coastal flooding that occurs in New Haven in several locations. We'll take a look at those locations in a moment. We can see or experience nuisance or sunny day flooding that occurs at very high tides, or some combination of all of the above could occur. So one thing about the planning realm is we try to avoid acronyms. They can be very frustrating in a presentation, but the floodplain people out there in the world, our friends at FEMA, they like to use acronyms. And so for the next few slides, even though it's a little bit frustrating, we're going to embrace some of these acronyms and learn what they are. And the reason is that if you decide to look at flood maps in the future on your own, you want to be able to understand what all those letters and numbers mean on the maps. So the special flood hazard area is what we sometimes call the floodplain or the 100-year flood zone or the 1% annual chance flood risk area. These are all one and the same when it comes to the FEMA flood maps. And so if you're living in the special flood hazard area, you're living in an area that has a 1% chance of flood occurring each year of a certain depth and magnitude. We also call it the 100-year flood zone, but we know that flooding can occur more than once every 100 years. In order for property owners to be eligible to purchase flood insurance, the city must regulate activities in these special flood hazard areas. The flood maps also show areas of a little bit lower risk, a moderate flood hazard, the 0.2% chance. We sometimes call this the 500-year flood zone. And we know that flooding can occur in the special flood hazard area, in the 500-year flood zone, or in other areas that aren't mapped as having flood risks. And it's really important to recognize that the flood maps that we're about to look at are based on past flood events and expected levels of Long Island Sound and rivers. And so they don't include changing conditions more intense precipitation that we seem to be getting. That's not included in this mapping. Next slide. So again, becoming more familiar with this term, special flood hazard area. Here's a map of those locations in the city. So they're found along the West River, Quinnipiac River, the Mill River, the harbor, and East Shore areas. So that green color. And the city has more than 1,500 buildings in the special flood hazard area, and about 3,600 people live in that area. About 800 FEMA flood insurance policies are active at any given moment, and that number does fluctuate. And about 200 million in coverage is included with those policies. So if you add up all 800 policies, people have about 200 million in coverage for flood damage. Next slide. So now we'll focus on the different kinds of flooding a little bit more. So the riverine flood risks occur in New Haven in the West River corridor, and that could include Beaver Brook and Wintergreen Brook, which are some of the streams that are pretty well known in the city. The Quinnipiac River and its tributaries and the Mill River all have riverine flood risks. And flooding can occur when rainfall is excessive and the streams overflow their banks. The special flood hazard area is represented by zone A and AE areas. We're going to look at those in about 30 seconds. It's important to note that areas outside of these river corridors can also flood. We could have infrastructure that's undersized, for example, drainage systems. We could have areas where the drainage systems are overwhelmed. People complain about flooded basements from time to time. That is another kind of flooding that can occur, happens in my house. And then water main breaks and dam failures. These are all things that can lead to different kinds of flooding outside of the riverine flood risk areas. On this slide, we're going to look at a map that is typical of what FEMA will prepare and send to cities and towns in the state to use to map flood, to show flood risks. So we don't choose these colors and these crosshatches, and they can be very confusing to look at when you first open up a FEMA map. So we're going to look at some of the areas right now. This is firm flood insurance rate map is another way to say FEMA flood map. So we'll go through some of the areas that are shown. There's a blue sort of dotted area, which is zone AE. So that is the special flood hazard area or the 100-year flood zone. The cross sections show where FEMA did its calculations to determine the flood elevations. The shaded zone with the little black dots is the 0.2% annual chance, 0.2 annual chance flood zone or 500-year flood zone on this map. And areas that aren't shown with any shading or crosshatch at all are assumed to have a low flood risk, but of course can still flood if rainfall is very intense. The base flood elevation, or BFE, another acronym that we have to sort of learn to live with in the FEMA flood realm, is the flood elevation. So it's a number and it's rounded to the nearest foot. So it could be 10 feet, which means 10 feet above sea level, or 20 feet, which means 20 feet above sea level. So it's not the number above the ground surface, it's relative to sea level. The floodway is a very dangerous area where water is moving quickly. And we had a good lesson in the United States this year about the word floodway. Many people learned it for the first time because of the news coming out of Texas. And so we want to really keep people out of the floodway when that's possible. Next slide. So pivoting from river flood risks to coastal flood risks, where do they occur in the city? So the harbor and East Shore areas, and then the lower parts of the Mill River, West River, and Quinnipiac River are also kind of coastally, tidally influenced. You can see this photograph right here. It's a photo that I took, I think 3 years ago in December during a coastal flood. I knew that flooding occurred at the underpass at Middletown Avenue. And so I drove out there to see if it was bad that day. And it was, floodwaters were a couple of feet deep and people were trying to drive through. So that's a dangerous situation that we'd rather not see occur. And it's one of the reasons why we conduct meetings like this. Can go to the next slide, I think, and jump into one of the maps. So some of the acronyms here are the same. So the unshaded zone X is where flood risk is assumed to be minimal. That same zone AE is the 100-year flood zone, or the special flood hazard area. The BFE, the base flood elevation, the same thing. It's a water surface above sea level, rounded to the nearest foot. We have an acronym here that's different than the riverine, which is zone VE, which is coastal flood risks that have some wave energy, where waves can damage infrastructure such as bridges or houses or walls. And then we have another term, the LIMWA, the limit of moderate wave action, which is the area that shows where the wave heights are not as high as on the water side. So if you see a LIMWA, and we're going to look at a map here in about 10 seconds, it shows where on one side waves are higher than 1.5 feet, on the other side waves are lower than 1.5 feet. So this is just a graphic that shows what we just looked at in a map view. You can see the house kind of in the middle there in the coastal AE zone where waves are between 1.5 and 3 feet. And then the LIMWA, which is that dark black vertical line with the little tick marks on one side, regular AE, wave height is less than 1.5 feet. And on the other side is the VE zone where waves are higher than 3 feet. And so the city is required to regulate land uses and building differently in these three areas. On the next map, we can take a look at the LIMWA. Oh, before we get to the map. So in 2000, I'll just say that really quickly, Kaylee, if you can go back. So it used to be that, oh, go back one more, if you don't mind. So it used to be that FEMA encouraged cities like New Haven to adopt higher standards in the VE zone and on the water side of the LIMWA. And ever since 2018, it's a requirement. So that's just an important thing to note that over time, building codes have increased. All right, next map is my last slide, which is a view of the limit of moderate wave action. So this can be hard to see on the typical FEMA flood maps. So there's a viewer that you can look at in your internet browser to help find that. And on this map, it's that dark red line. And you can see Long Wharf is just off the page to the left. River Street area and Fairhaven is in the upper right, and then all the tank farms in the port area on the lower right of this graphic. And some structures are on the water side of the LIMWA and some are not on the water side of the LIMWA. So the city really takes a look at that when regulating land use. Okay, I think that's it for mapping.
Thank you, David. That was
A lot.
a lot, but all very helpful information because those FEMA maps can be a lot to take in for anyone, not just residents. For me as someone who works with this stuff, it's confusing. So breaking it down that way is super important for people to understand what those different zones mean. And we'll get into a little bit of if you are in one of those zones or any area in the city that has a potential to flood, what you can do to protect yourself and protect your property. So on the screen here, the first thing is to stay informed. I have a link on the screen to sign up for New Haven Alerts, which is where messaging from the city can get out to residents or property owners or anyone who signs up very quickly. In the event of a flood or some sort of weather event or some sort of road closure, they will send out a text and you'll be able to be up to date with that type of information. Some other things that may seem obvious but are still important. Avoid flooded areas, especially if there's down power lines, and do not drive through flooded areas. During David's section of this presentation, there was quite a few photos that showed severely flooded roads in New Haven. It's a pretty common thing. Never attempt to drive through them under any circumstance. To protect your property, which we're going to get into a little bit more later, insure your property. Flood insurance is super helpful, even if you think you might never need it. There's always a chance you will. And this is just some statistics on the monetary amounts of insurance in the area. And then Another physical way to protect your property are elevating residential structures and floodproofing commercial structures. And this gets into our city's flood damage prevention ordinance, which is a document that lays out all of the different requirements for these two things, as well as the specific types of floodproofing or elevation measures that need to be taken on a project by project basis. So if you're someone who's in the project planning or development phase of a building, that flood damage prevention ordinance is something that you're going to want to be very familiar with. And the intention of that ordinance is to protect New Haven's properties from flood damage. So this goes into it the same way, but same as our flood damage prevention ordinance, state building code, and our regular zoning ordinance, all of those documents have provisions to make sure that structures are built responsibly and that they are built in a way that will make them resilient to floods and other weather events, especially if they're being built in a higher risk flood zone. The New Haven Building Department and the City Plan Department can always advise and take anyone through the process of the permits and measures that you may want to take if you are going to be building a new structure or modifying an existing structure. Getting into a little bit different of a strategy is protecting the functions of the natural floodplain. So that gets into the use of fill, which is also regulated in our flood damage prevention ordinance, building responsibly in a way that has the minimum impact on the natural environment, protecting storm drain function. So that's as simple as clearing grass clippings, other waste, other litter, from storm drains so that during flood events they can function as intended. And again, knowing the steps to protect yourself and your property. And then reparation, knowing the steps to take to protect yourself and your property. It's on there multiple times because knowing this information and knowing, one, the level of risk that you may be facing, and two, the basic steps you can do to protect yourself is the most important thing when it comes to preventing flood loss. So right here is a link to our city plan flood information page that has plus more. It's really a one-page like landing site for all of the local and general flood resources you could ask for. So I highly recommend checking that out because there's a lot of good information on there on everything we just discussed. And here's another page just dedicated to the New Haven alert system. Again, knowing that an event is coming or occurring or a certain hazard has happened as the result of a weather event is super important, and it's the first step in protecting yourself. And David referenced these FEMA maps quite a few times during his presentation, but here's just another slide on it. This is a link to FEMA's interactive mapping portal. So it takes all of the maps that have been created by FEMA and turns it into a interactive tool where all you have to do is type in a location, it'll zoom you into that location, and you can very easily see what flood zone you're in. And if you really dig, you can get a ton of information out of it. But again, you can always use the city as a resource in interpreting these and making a plan to protect your property. And I am going to pass it over to Diane to talk about flood insurance now.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So I know insurance is often a dry and boring topic. But as Dave mentioned a little earlier, there was that massive flood in Texas this July. But I want to remind everybody also that last August, not very, like just about a year ago, over a year ago, our residents to the west of you in Monroe, Oxford, Southbury, and the Naugatuck Valley had devastating floods on August 18th of 2024. So that's why this is a good, as David said, this is a good topic to visit every year. And then also, I just watched the news tonight. We're going to get 2 inches of rain. The tropics are starting to heat up. So it's important to realize what flood insurance can do. One of the things that happened last August in the Naugatuck Valley was that was a 500 or 1,000-year event. It was a colossal event for certain towns, not every town. You guys were probably on the edge of it and you didn't have really much going on. That thing could have easily just jockeyed over New Haven and you would have been the Monroe situation. Did not insurance outside the map flood zones because they just felt, well, I don't need it. So we want to get the message out, especially the governor's office, that where it rains, it can flood. As David said, it could flood anywhere, really. We're getting a lot of these rain bombs or extreme precipitation events. So that's why insurance can help you there. A lot of people think disaster assistance is going to come. That's only if we get a federally declared disaster. You have to have a really high threshold. So one of the things I wanted to talk about too is often there's a problem with people think they have flood insurance and they say, well, I have a homeowner's policy, so that covers flood. So it does not. A normal homeowner's policy that you get with your mortgage that your bank makes you get covers really fire and wind. That's it. So here's how you kind of think about this. So if water, and it's on the screen, it says if water is falling from the sky and say wind rips off your roof and water gets in through the roof, homeowner's policy will cover that, okay? However, if water is flowing over the ground, say from any kind of water source or poor drainage, kind of the pictures Dave showed you in the street, that's a flood insurance policy. And believe me, an adjuster knows the difference. They're going to come, they're going to look, and if they see, they know what they're looking at. So if you're getting water from the ocean or whatever, that has to be a separate flood insurance policy that you buy. Dave showed you all the A zones, those blue A and V zones. So if you have, in the federal government mandates that banks, if you have a mortgage and you are in one of those mapped floodplains, as part of your mortgage, along with homeowners, they're going to make you get flood insurance. Again, if you pay the mortgage off, you could drop everything, obviously. But that is that act here, the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1972. It's called the mandatory purchase requirement. But again, 100-year, if you're in one of those 100-year or blue flood zones that were shown on the map, and you have a mortgage, your bank is going to either make you get it, force place it, etc. Okay, Kaylee, next one. So how does it work? Again, it says it right there. Lenders are required by federal law to make you get that flood insurance if you're in that mapped floodplain. Again, another misconception, you can get it if you're not in the mapped floodplain. So, and here's another misconception. Every town in this state participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. We are actually one of the few states or a small state where we have 100% coverage. So if you moved from New Haven to Guilford to Cheshire, wherever, you can buy it in any town, and you can buy it on the top of a mountain or down by the sound. It doesn't matter. The other thing too is some mortgage companies do this in-house and they check this when you get a mortgage, but a lot of them will hire what they call a flood determination company. It's kind of a third-party vendor. They are often very conservative, with their determinations if you're in that 100-year floodplain, because again, they're on the side of the bank, not necessarily you. But they do notify you if you do need flood insurance. Then the rest of the things there, all the little boxes that you see on the screen, is how FEMA rates policies. So it is definitely the case that if you're in one of those A zones, the blue or V zones, those blue areas on the map, you are probably going to pay more money because that's where the risk is. However, FEMA a number of years ago tried to redo how they did risk, and you could see all the different things now that they take into account when they look at risk, and for risk means your premium. A big one now is distance to water. So it used to be like if you were just outside that zone, you paid like nothing. And now maybe that's a little bit more. They're looking at, again, number of floors, type of construction, claims, cost to rebuild. And that just means like you have a kind of a, say, a ranch versus like a mansion house. So if you have a smaller house, you're going to pay less, and a bigger house, you're going to pay more. So there is a mechanism now. If you go to FEMA's floodsmart.gov website, again, don't go to .com, go to floodsmart.gov, G-O-V. They do have a quoting tool. I think it takes like 10 minutes. It's not really awful if you don't want to talk to an agent. You can also find agents on that same website, floodsmart.gov. So normal companies, let's say the Allstates, the Nationwides, those kind of things. Most of those companies act as like third-party middlemen for the federal government. So these are federal policies. You can buy them through a normal insurance agent, and so if you have a homeowner's policy, you can ask them, "Hey, can you give me a quote for flood?" Or you can just go online and do a quick quote and just see what it costs you if you really want to. But again, they are federal policies. You're not going to like FEMA to buy a policy. You can do it right from an agent, and on that website, it'll tell you which companies do offer that. Okay, so it's fairly easy. And even if it's a company that doesn't sell it, usually they can find you, a policy for yourself. Okay, next slide. Next one, Kaylee. Sorry. All right, now we're going to talk about the Community Rating System, or CRS. So I said every town in Connecticut participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is awesome. A subset of that is something called the Community Rating System. It is a voluntary program, as Dave initially said, that New Haven participates in. Nobody makes them do it, but it's there to recognize towns that go beyond the minimum standards. They offer more services. They do more in floodplain management activities in the city, and because of that, FEMA recognizes that and rewards them with discounts on flood insurance. Go to the next slide, Kayla. So these are the towns that currently in Connecticut participate. You could see a lot of them are coastal towns: Stamford, Westport, Fairfield, Stratford, Milford. Again, all the way up, East Lyme. We have a few inland towns: Newtown, Norwich, which is kind of half-half on the Thames River there. And that's West Hartford up in the top. We also have the town of Groton, who's currently actively looking to get into the program. They've started that process, so hopefully they'll be coming along soon. Hold on, let's see. Yep, go to the next one, Kaylee. So how does this program work? So FEMA offers if you really want it, you can Google it, but it's basically like a points program. So there's a whole laundry list of activities a town can pick from. Things like public outreach and information, kind of like what we're doing tonight. Cleaning of storm drains, which are public works, every town does, regularly. Stronger, higher regulations. Participating in the state's dam safety program, which again, every town does. Regulatory permitting, which again, Kaylee went over in detail. Open space preservation in the floodplain. Planning, again, Kaylee talked a lot about that. Warning systems. All these things the town applies for. Points are awarded, and then you add up all the points and you become a certain class. New Haven is one of the few towns in the state with the highest class 7, which means a 15% discount. So it's every 5%, 10%, 15%. So it'd be 9, 8, 7. So you guys are a class 7, along with Stamford and I believe the town of Stonington. That was the last slide. Not that you care, but whatever. But the point is you're one of our best participating communities because you're doing a lot to, again, give information, warning, permitting, planning, and that kind of thing. So again, the city also participates in a regional hazard mitigation plan. I believe that's through SCROG, correct? Right? Okay. Let's see what else. And you also have an awesome emergency management department. So again, you do a lot with warnings and response, and Kaylee had that uh, website there to sign up for alerts. I would highly recommend you do that. And any other alerts that you think are applicable, National Weather Service, some of the news outlets, NBC 30, et cetera, WFSB, whichever ones you like, they also have a lot of web warning things for weather, which are also really good. And I think I might be done. I think we're on the last slide, Kaylee.
Yes, thank you so much, Diane. And sorry, I'm having some trouble clicking the next button if anyone hasn't noticed.